There are people in life that you come across that affect you in some way. They inspire you and cause you to look at your own life with a greater sense of purpose. Russell Petherbridge is one of those folks who really inspires me. After conversations with Russell, I think about my own artistic path with more clarity and depth.
You cannot actually see where you're going unless you're producing work, which means starting it, seeing it through to the end, putting it aside and moving on, and you'll start to get a reflection and you'll start to see where your strong points are. You really have to get a body of work out there.
What Russell can do with steel is mind-blowing. His works are whimsical, emotive, and some have a beautiful playfulness to them. Ever since I first met Russell, I've wanted to paint his portrait. I'd like to take you through the step-by-step process of how this painting came together. After finding a location for our subject, Russell, I set up my portable easel and squeeze out a limited amount of color. For a list of the Language handmade oil colors used in this episode, please visit www.andrewtischler.com and subscribe to the Great Art Adventure bonus newsletter, where I send all of my subscribers additional tips, tricks, and techniques that relate to each episode. I'm thinking of three main points when composing my sketch of Russell. 1. Form and structure. This is where I consider the planes of the face and the relationships between his features. For example, eyes, nose, mouth, and ears. 2. Light. This is a vitally important consideration. The light across the forms of the face can really show off the subject's character. 3. Point of view. The viewer's position relative to the subject is not often considered, but it is crucial. This aspect allows me to re-engage with my why, my purpose for painting the picture. In this instance, I want the viewer to feel as though they are engaged in conversation with Russell, and perhaps they can catch a glimpse of what I find so inspiring about him. I take a reference photograph to refer to later, being sure to expose for both the highlights and the shadows. Working directly from life, I add the structure of the face in broad strokes, being sure not to get bogged down in detail. It's really important to resist the temptation to add too many minor features at this stage. I'm paying close attention to color, form, and light, adhering to my initial sketch. Back in the studio, and I've progressed with my sketch. The form of the face is refined, and I knock in the background with an umber and ultramarine combination. It looks dark, but it's far from black. With dark, rich reds, I add another layer of deeper tone to the shadows of the face. This occurs in the absence of the skylight and will allow for a certain kind of heat to come through the portrait. Shadows are rounded out with cool reflected light bouncing off the shirt, and we're already getting a sculptural feel. In this stage, I try to keep my marks broad and gestural, carving sections of the face to define Russell's form. It's far from perfect, but getting closer. The line between light and dark is blended slightly to round out the form of the face. Now, just to revisit the overall shape, I start to bring the background in to define the head and the hair with negative space. The sketch is progressing, and now I feel it needs just a bit more color. The tones on the skin were a little on the cool side, so I introduce a bit of raw sienna and work this in. When defining the facial features, subtlety is the key. It's easy to be heavy-handed with adding highlights to the rendered form. These light marks are far from white. More and more, the form is emerging, and I'm nearly ready to get into what really defines Russell's character, the eyes. Once happy with the placement of colors and tones, I add the surface detail, the brows, and a little stubble. Finally, my sketch is finished. Overall, I'm happy with it. I feel ready to get into the big version of this portrait. But before we do, let's get to know Russell Petherbridge and his work a little better. Russell lives and works in Yandoit, a little-known town outside of Daylesford, Victoria. The scenery here is stunning, and his playful works complement the landscape. The locals have grown accustomed to them as well.
Sculpture drew me out real quick. And the whole point of going into the arts was total freedom and selfishness, as in I want to explore the absolute best I can do, and this is the way. This is the hardest thing I think is truth, is art. The other thing I love about steel, because that's my chosen medium really, is it's just so fierce to work with. You can smack it so hard, you can break it, but you can always apologise to it and put it back together again. And it all disappears into this beautiful curve of steel. Don't work where you've got to keep tidying up, because you lose this plot, you lose the thread. Find a studio where you can leave your stuff out.
While I was visiting Russell, he began to work on a maquette for a large steel sculpture.
There's a lot more filing to do.
Process is very important here, and before commencing a larger work, he builds a model to scale using the same materials.
This is obviously the centerpiece of, what would you think, a girl on a swing possibly?
It's clear that Russell is absorbed by his art. Hearing him talk about the process he goes through and his inspiration, I felt it reflected my own experiences.
The road is a continuous one. There's no way I'm going to retire and step off that road. No, I'll follow art through to the end.
Now I'm back in the studio and I'm ready to get started. Similar to my initial sketch, I map out the lines of the form, this time using a light tone on a dark burnt umber background. Following my sketch and working wet into wet, I work in my highlights and my shadows simultaneously, preserving my lightest and darkest tones. Though the hair looks white as I block it in, it is far from it. At no point in this initial step do I worry about detail. Moving ahead, I have manipulated the colors back and forth in a similar fashion to my sketch. Now, I just need to check that everything is in the right place. By using my brush as a measuring stick, I check the relationships between the eyes, nose, and mouth. I'm confident I have the face mapped out, so I begin to add character lines of wrinkles on the forehead and the cheeks. To get the skin to have variation and interest, I introduce all sorts of colors. Capillaries close to the surface will give a reddish tinge. I balance this with cool tones of blues, greens, and purples, all in a very light, almost pastel hue. Then I add some superficial highlights to give the forehead mass. The eyes give the painting presence and life. I sculpt each iris, checking the adjacent one against it. I keep the colors subdued. I'm trying not to overdo it here. Now I'm into detailing my portrait and there's something niggling at me. I persevere and hope for that moment that things click into place. I must be getting closer to a true likeness. I'm a little fearful that the look may be off, and perhaps it's a lack of eyebrows that is tripping me up. Oh, it's not working. I got so bogged down in the details, and I must admit I was really enjoying it, just painting away at all these little tiny fine features that it just got away from me. And I found out that I was actually creeping further and further out from what the real position of his facial features were. It all comes down to the eyes, the nose, and the mouth, and their relationship within the overall structure of the face. And a couple of millimeters out here and there, it's going to become somebody else entirely. So whilst it kind of is looking like Russell, it doesn't really have that character, that oomph that I really need it to have. I really mean to nail this painting. So the way I see it, I got a couple of options. I must admit the thought has crossed my mind that I would just start again and get rid of this painting, re-stretch it, and just start from scratch. But I've come up against this wall time and time again within my career, and I think that I could probably be a little bit more creative and actually come up with a fix and come up with a solution to this problem. So we'll see how we go and see if we might be able to pull this one out of the fire, but we're a little ways off. Realizing my error, I'm marking the changes to be made directly on the painting with a light color as to make it blaringly obvious to myself what needs to be done. It's funny how just a matter of millimeters can turn the portrait into a picture of somebody else. With the changes marked, I go to work on fixing the shape and the position of Russell's features. After about 7 coffees, your brush will move pretty quickly too. The eyes are adjusted in accordance to the corrections made. Better. We're getting closer to the desired effect. With all of the changes made now, I can get back to the detail. I start to work on the hair. I vary my technique and the size of the brush so the surface is not monotonous. Now the silver hairs can be added with a fine pointed brush. Nothing reflects light like thick paint, so to make these marks pop, I use a touch of impasto medium. Stubble is added to the dry painting and then is reworked slightly so it blends in with the surface. Now for just a little more life in the eyes. Light bouncing off the shirt gives a great highlight to the lower edge of the eyeball. These are the last marks I add before calling it a day. Finally, this portrait of Russell is finished. It's the night before the big reveal. I'm really happy with this painting, but I'm also really anxious to see what he thinks of it. It's quite nerve-wracking, I must admit, anticipating his reaction, but I can't wait to show him. So this has been the last 3 weeks. Pretty intense, pretty weird, because I feel like I know you a bit better now, but I'm really curious to see what you think. Go ahead and open your eyes.
Excellent. Straight off. Yep. Come a long way with that. Yeah. Love it, mate. Love it.
Oh,
yeah. Very happy with it. Yeah, can I get up close and look?
Yeah, get up close. Have a look.
I can see a bit of my father coming out in you now. Turned out to be the artist I wanted you to be. I'm very pleased with that. One of the reasons you stay as an artist, mate, you get these unknown highs that you could never get any other way. You created it yourself.
Well, guys, that's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I enjoyed making it for you. Of course, it's hard to take 100 hours of studio time and condense that into a 10-minute episode and give you all of the necessary information. So jump over to my website, andrewtischler.com, and subscribe to the Great Art Adventure bonus newsletter for additional tips, tricks, and techniques. I'll see you next week.